First, I'm just so pleased to welcome back to our call Senator Sherrod Brown, who I can now introduce as the incoming chairman of the Senate Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee. And we are all certainly thrilled to see him in that role and look forward to working with him on comprehensive solutions to the COVID eviction crisis and to the longstanding and underlying affordable housing crisis. And as everybody on this call knows well, Senator Brown is a champion for these issues, and his leadership was instrumental to having Congress extend the eviction moratorium and provide $25 billion in emergency rental assistance. So we're so looking forward to his continued and strengthened leadership in the Senate. So Senator Brown, welcome back to the call, and thank you so much for your tremendous dedication to the housing needs of the lowest income people. I'll turn it over to you.
Diane, thank you, and the same to you. You all know in this call the leadership that Diane Yantil has shown, and it was I've known it for years. I've seen her in our committee. Can't count the number of times, and always good insight, always passionate in her advocacy, but dispassionate in terms of facts and bringing and persuasion of committee members. But I really saw it this December when we had tried to get the $25 billion in emergency rental assistance, and she did such a good job of organizing and pushing and cajoling and all the things and organizing so many of you to put pressure on Republicans and on Mitch McConnell to finally do this. And you all know that, the moratorium's important, the dollars are important. You all know the tidal wave of evictions that could happen and will happen unless Congress had done that in December, but now continues to do that in the next package. And Diane's been so key, and because she understands housing so well from her work in Massachusetts and here now nationally, how important it is that this be carried out in the right way, that the moratorium continues, and that the money gets out in ways that keep people from being evicted in the middle of the winter, in the middle of the pandemic. So thank you all on behalf of all families all over the country. Thanks for the work that all 800 of you, I think that's the number I heard her on this call. Let me talk for a moment, as Diane did, about this week. We were in session in the Senate. None of us, I can't speak for everybody, but I don't think we felt our lives in danger, and House members did, because it was clear, the more we know, that this was a professional, organized militia. These were people that many of them had trained. There were some hangers-on that were along perhaps for the ride, but many of them had, but you also, of course, know if this had been a Black Lives Matter rally, the number of deaths would have been multiples of 5 that were actually killed in this rally, but in this riot. But if it had been a Black Lives Matter rally, the number of deaths would have been many-fold of this, and the number of arrests would have been hundreds, not a dozen. And we all know that. And I think America learned something, because much of white America didn't quite understand that so well until they saw the picture after this happened, the picture of the very well-equipped, well-protected police officers standing with their shields and their guns or their batons with helmets, standing at the Lincoln Memorial, protecting only the statue of a guy in marble, Abraham Lincoln, versus what happened at the Capitol when hundreds of staff people, from custodians to secretaries to assistants to senators and House members, were. So I called last week on the vice president to invoke the 25th Amendment. He likely won't do that. I have said we should look at impeachment. I've said that Hawley and Cruz should resign, or we should consider expulsion. We also know that it wasn't just the ringleaders like Cruz and Hawley. It was a whole party of senators and House members who continued to say that there was fraud in this election and are unwilling to call this president out. And then he obviously incited this riot. So, but all of this, the darkest time, one of the worst days in our nation's history. But what gives me hope today is the resiliency of the people in this country. We saw it in Georgia last Tuesday, the first African-American and the first Jew elected to the United States Senate from that state. that state's voters. My mother grew up in Georgia. My mom, I'm old enough to remember not the Supreme Court decision, Brown v. Board of Education, but the aftermath of when we did busing around the country for integration. I remember my mom said to me one day, she said, I remember busing in Georgia. She grew up in a town of 500 in Georgia. Said, I remember busing. It was when black kids were bused in old rickety buses past the nice white schoolhouse to the inferior black school building. And that was what busing was in those days in the South. And so I think of the Dr. King quote when he was reading from the letter to Birmingham jail, when he wrote the letter from the Birmingham jail to the quote unquote moderate ministers that were admonishing him to go slow and be cautious and we'll get there. And King wrote the line, progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. Progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. And only he could have written it so beautifully. It rolls in because we make it so. It's what you do on this call. It's what all of you as activists, Diane, and all of you do is you advocate for housing justice. It's what you did last year when the House first passed the emergency rental assistance bill that Chairwoman Maxine Waters from California, who's my counterpart in the House, when we introduced that bill back in May. For half a year, McConnell blocked it. You kept pushing. Your advocacy allowed us to secure that $25 billion finally in December, and to get the extension of the CDC's national eviction moratorium in that December package. It's not everything we need, of course. It's a critical first step. It will help prevent that wave of evictions that was inevitable if Congress hadn't acted. It will help deal with housing instability. It will help those families that just, even though they got the moratorium and just every month one more rent payment they owed, it's a burden they can never pay off without some federal help. So with the results in Georgia, we have an opportunity to make real progress on housing. In the name of the committee that I will chair is referred colloquially as it's around the Capitol and to many around the country as the Senate Banking Committee. I always refer to it as the Banking Housing Committee because its real name is Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs. And the word housing the rest of my career, however long that is, I represent a state that's, to say, not an easy state for a progressive like me to win. But I will devote the rest of my career to housing. It's the most important thing, what you are fighting for every day, safe, affordable, accessible housing to people. There's nothing more important. You all know this, it affects life expectancy, it affects children's opportunity, it affects education, it affects safe drinking water, it affects nutritious foods, access to nutritious foods, it affects everything, good housing. And you know this number, a quarter of people who rent in this country pre-pandemic, a quarter of people who rent spend 50% or more of their income in housing and utilities. And one thing goes wrong in their life, their car breaks down, their child gets sick, they get hurt in the workplace and have to take a week off of work, and everything can go upside down for them. So the pandemic, in a curious way, tragic and curious ways, taught us what you've known for years, and that is how safe, stable housing is essential to our well-being. I will, as the chair of this committee, have a strong partner in Marcia Fudge as incoming HUD secretary. I am sitting right now in Congresswoman Marcia Fudge's district. It's where I live. My zip code, the zip code where Connie and I live, back in 2007, it had more foreclosures than any zip code in the United States. I still see the remnants of that. How hard it is for a community to fight back. So we will have two Clevelanders leading on housing issues. We'll start by working with the Biden administration to quickly get out the emergency rental assistance that we passed, and we'll extend the eviction protections as we get people the help they need. We're going to begin work immediately on a new COVID relief package that'll help us get this pandemic under control. It'll put money in people's pockets. Think about, I was just talking to the CEO of a major bank, and he was marveling at, he's not an ally on a number of issues with me, but he was marveling at what Congress did back in March. When we passed that first COVID package, a study 4 months later, a study showed that 13 million people were kept out of poverty because we did what we should have done on housing, and it wasn't quite enough, to be sure, and it certainly hasn't been enough since. But for unemployed workers, for small businesses, for housing, for local governments, we did things that really, really mattered. So we need to get to work to address the underlying affordable housing crisis and inequality. This is about income inequality. It's about wealth inequality. It's about structural racism. And that's everything this committee does on housing. Everything this committee does, period, will be through the prism of what does this do about racial inequality, structural racism? What does this do about wealth inequality? How do these actions, we're going to look at legislation and work in this committee and hearings through the eyes of workers, not through the eyes of Wall Street, but through the eyes of everybody else in the society who's been left behind. We'll work especially to preserve and create affordable housing, to prevent and end homelessness. Bill Faith, my longtime Ohio friend and partner, has done such impressive things with Co-Ohio. We always look to him for leadership. We need to invest in low-income neighborhoods, communities of color that have suffered from disinvestment. This committee will play a role in combating climate change and advancing environmental justice through energy efficient, healthy housing, and on the transportation side, which this committee works on too, on public transit, on more energy efficient public transportation, and always addressing racial and ethnic disparities in our housing and communities. And that means strengthening fair housing protections that have been under assault during the Trump administration. The HUD, as you know, has been on the wrong side of history on all these issues. I mean, it started with the black codes, then it was Jim Crow, then it was redlining, and then it was the Trump administration locking in these discriminatory practices. Those we will wipe away. We can't wipe away the history of Jim Crow and the history of the black codes and Jim Crow and redlining, but we can dismantle it and we can move forward. So I will stop right there. If Diane wants a question or two, I'm willing to take a couple more minutes if people want to. And thank you so much, all of you, for continued advocacy on behalf of your neighbors and our communities all over the country. So if Diane wants to do questions, I'm certainly willing.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Senator Brown. I couldn't agree more with everything you said. And speaking of Bill Faith, he put a comment in the chat box to say, "You are just awesome, my friend. We are with you in this fight, Mr. Chairman." And if you have a chance, I hope you'll take a look at many comments in the chat box and in the Q&A. Many people who are on this line, we have over 1,000 people on the line now, many of them expressing their thanks to you for your leadership and your commitment and your work. So I hope you'll get a chance to take a look at that. But I would love to hear more from you. I think all of us would, about what's next and how we prioritize the many needs for assistance for low-income renters and to end homelessness. You know, how do we kind of sequence, and what are your priorities to address first as incoming chairman of the committee?
Yeah. Thanks. The first thing is, the first thing we do, this is more procedural, but we need to quickly move on confirming nominees, Marcia Fudge, and through this committee, Marcia Fudge and Cecilia Rouse. Marcia Fudge, I said, is my congresswoman. So Cecilia Rouse is interestingly, the daughter-in-law of Toni Morrison, the great writer from Lorain, Ohio. And she is a professor at Princeton, and she is the new chair of the Council of Economic Advisors. She will be in the room on all economic decisions. Essentially, that's what that job does, and that's so important. So we will move on confirmations. We've got to decide what we do with impeachment. I'm concerned that impeachment gets in the way, if you will. I know that maybe I shouldn't have waded into this, but gets in the way of the things we need to do, only because all work stops during an impeachment trial. It doesn't mean we don't work. We're not working on the side, making sure that we're moving on this other legislation. But the COVID relief package, to me, is the most important thing we do. As much as I think Trump deserves impeachment, as much as I think he deserves to be convicted, as much as I think Giuliani and Eric Trump, or whichever Trump it was that was exhorting people to violence, as much as I think a number of those people that that assaulted police officers and broke windows and surged into the Capitol and called the black police officers names. Those people deserve to be held accountable, and that means prison sentences when they earned it, if you will. I want to really use this committee to focus on what we do on making sure there's enough money for eviction assistance, and I will consult with Diane and Bill and others on that this money gets out the door and it's done right. The oversight of making sure it's done right is essential. Keeping the moratorium is essential. And I said in those comments, we've got to get help to local governments so that they don't start laying off massive numbers of people. And we know those functions they do in local government, from schools to children's services to police and fire, are essential. We've got to get the vaccine out to teachers so that students can go back to school in person. We know that our society will pay as a society, and our children will pay as individuals if we especially can't get low-income, moderate-income kids back in the classroom. We'll never get the economy going well enough when parents have to worry about their kids going to school or not going to school and being home, and all the problems that causes with so many working parents. So that's the beginning of this. And then when the vaccines are distributed to everyone and we've convinced as a society enough people to take them, which is 70, 80, 90% of the people, we then will turn to what do we do long-term on housing to build more housing. And there are all kinds of ideas. Beth on this call, my staff kind of went through a litany today of discussion on how we do that. We support, when we do a big infrastructure bill, which I hope we do, that includes public transit. It includes building housing around transit stops so people can go to work safely and cheaply, and more, if I could, more energy efficiently, and by investments in the National Housing Trust Fund and public housing. I just think there are so many opportunities here, and the pent-up demand. Since Diane's worked with this committee so many years, the pent-up demand is great, and we really do think it's really these first 100 days. It's all about, this committee has been about Wall Street for far too many years. The first 100 days, people are going to see this committee is going to look out for everybody else. And I'll just end the answer with this. I want people to be able to say, in the summer of 2022, I went out and voted in 2020 and my life got better. And, whether it's the earned child tax credit, whether it's housing, whether it's the overtime rule, whether it's minimum wage, whether it's helping working class kids pay off their student loans, all of these things we need to deliver. Much of that is through the Banking Housing Committee. Much of it's through other committees. That doesn't matter to the public. They just want to feel within several months of taking over here in the Senate and in the White House that their lives got better.
Well, that sounds like a very exciting and appropriate agenda, and one we really look forward to working closely with you and your staff on. And just have to say, what I know you already know is that you have a tremendous staff, and we're really grateful to work with Beth Cooper and Jeremy and Megan and others who do tremendous work on your behalf, and we're grateful to them, and we're so grateful to you for your leadership, Senator Brown. Thank you so much for joining.
Well, they actually one correction, Diane, is Joe Biden said when he announced the Attorney General, he said he's not my Attorney General, he's the country's Attorney General, and he said this staff works on my behalf. They really work on your behalf and the behalf of the people on this call. So I know you know that, but I just thought I'd throw that in so I could disagree with you on one little thing.
That's fair. And very
well, thank
true.
you. Thanks to all of you. And just your activism is so important. And every time I've talked to you all, you've had hundreds of people on the call. And I just so appreciate there are people all over this country that even in the darkest times, the last few years, you've been out there. And that's why times are brighter now, because you've been doing that. So once we get through this inauguration and whatever these militia groups are planning on the 17th and the 20th, this country is going to go in the right direction, and you're a big part of that. So thanks, everybody, for allowing me to say a few words.
Thank you so much, Senator Brown. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks. All right. See you. Thanks, Dan. See you.
Bye-bye.